Good afternoon. By about 2 minutes. I needed to have cleaned my glasses better than I have because I currently just see a lot of swirly smudges. My name's Anna Higgs. I'm creative director at the culture channel Nowness, and I'm really pleased to be here to chair this panel, and terribly important panel, I think, in the current climate, as we'll probably talk quite a lot about, which is all about arts commissioning. Just as an intro, obviously you're all here, I think, because you do agree that creativity and culture are now ever more vital. The arts and culture in a broader context are a way of us communicating with each other, of forging stronger connections, but also understanding and celebrating difference. There was a really interesting quote that from a very high-end cultural source, the Adam Buxton podcast, which I am completely obsessed with. The podcast he did with Brian Eno was a really interesting one, I thought, where he talked about how children learn through play, but adults play through art. And I wanted to think about that kind of sense of the balance of the seriousness, the responsibility that as arts commissioners you have, but also that sense of playfulness. And I think there's a lot that we might talk about there. So we're here today to talk about the changing face of arts commissioning, what they mean to each of the commissioners here and their channels, and how to bring arts content to both a broad and a niche audience. Although I'm going to try and ban the C word. I hate the word content, even having just said it, because I feel like it's a very distribution-centric and kind of slightly... I don't know what's the right word. It just feels like it's sort of boxing something up or throwing it into a bucket.
All I can think about now is content.
Yeah, sorry. It makes me discontent, but that's another story for another day. But what we'll do to start with is get a quick intro across the panel and the panellists, who all come from a really, really interesting spread. And what I'm going to do is, through the different theme sections of the panel, is we'll open up to audience questions. So please do, as we're going along, if you have a particular question, please do think about that, and we'll have roving mics, so I'll point to you as and when we're ready to do that section. But to start with, I would love to introduce Linda, who's Commissioning Executive for Arts at ABC Australia. Inspired by my channel's recent win of a Webby, clang, there's my plug done, we had to do a 5-word acceptance speech, which I think much more award ceremonies should take up. So I've asked each of you to come up with 5 words that represent your channel or your commissioning work in arts.
I was jealous. I wanted John's 5 words
when
I read them.
So what would your
we're in
5
different
words
territories.
be?
You could definitely have them.
Thanks.
You're going first anyway. So.
Yes, exactly. No, I would say innovation and world-class content. Because I would like people to think that just because we're down there doesn't mean that we're not, aspiring to greatness.
Great. Well, can you tell us about some of that greatness? What commissions are you most proud of that are either present or upcoming?
Well, we commission a really broad spread of things, and I would say probably one of the things we're most proud of is an initiative that we have called the Hive, which is an initiative with one of the state funding bodies in South Australia, which gives artists a chance to make their first film, be it documentary or feature. They're paired with a mentor, a creative mentor, and a lot of the films that have come out of that initiative have gone on to do really great things, win awards. A couple of examples are Girl Asleep, some people might have heard of in the audience. And a lot of those artists have gone on to carry on making other documentaries. And I've got an example of one of them here today that I'm really excited to show people. So
fantastic.
And we've got a series on at the moment, which we're also very proud of, called Stories of Australian Cinema, which is a kind of 2-pronged journey. It's David Stratton, who some people might have heard of, a critic, a long-term critic in Australia, is a bit of a national institution, on a sort of journey to discover the stories that inspire us in cinema, but also to talk about how those great moments in cinema shaped him as a new Australian when he came from the UK as a £10 pom.
Okay.
So
thank you. And we'll talk a bit more about your commissioning overview once we've done all the intros. Phil, Edgar-Jones from Sky Arts. Can you tell us your 5 words?
So, I've just realised I miscounted like Diane Abbott, and I've only got 4 words. So I always think of Sky Arts as the home of genius. That's how I kind of think about it in my mind when I'm talking to people about it. Partly because we have arts content through history in a way. We do documentaries, everything from Frida Kahlo to Bob Dylan, and I always think of the channel is, you know, the Ferrero Rocher parties that the ambassador used to throw.
Yes.
They're brilliant, the best party in the world, but you could only get into the party at Sky Arts if you were a bona fide arts genius.
Okay.
And that's kind of how I think of the channel.
That's a lovely example. I'm picturing people walking around with trays.
Yes, that's what it's like in the Sky offices. We have
wonderful.
Ferrero Rocher.
And what commissions are you most proud of that are past or upcoming?
Well, actually, so when I took on the channel, what I wanted to do was do sort of three things, really. I wanted to provide content for quite niche audiences, so I think of the sort of aficionado audience that comes into the channel, not in great numbers, but they're very passionate about the stuff they love, whether that's, you know, Wagner's Ring Cycle, or whether that's country music, or whether that's heavy metal, so those sort of niche aficionado audiences. I wanted to make the channel a bit more famous, so I wanted to do stuff that was a bit it was more artist-led and got a bit more PR around it. And then the big thing for me, very much at the beginning, and we've sort of got there now over the past 3 years, was to broaden the appeal of the channel and make people less frightened of the word arts. So in the schedule now, we have 4 sort of fact-ent pillars. We have Landscape Artist of the Year, Portrait Artist of the Year, Master of Photography, and we're doing a big show with Tony Visconti, which is coming up, which is the evolution of Guitar Star that we've done for a couple of years. So those shows, I'm very proud of the fact that those shows get big audiences, and then we can obviously surprise people by the other more niche content we've got around it as well. And I've got a couple of things. I've got one little thing to show today that we're working on, which is a big project on dance, which is effectively, you know, trying to do civilization for the world of dance, which is fronted by Akram Khan, and it's just the sort of definitive academic documentary on dance, I think, series on dance.
Lovely, thank you. John Hay, Head of Specialist Factual, but also with the Arts Remit, which is where you were promoted from at Channel 4. 5 words.
So I said, our world through artists' eyes, because that's what we've been trying to do for a long time now. We've been trying to invert the kind of traditional arts documentary that makes the artist the subject of the film and have the artist be the author of the film. Either sort of follow them as they make work about some aspect of our non-arts part of our world, like the Grace and Perry programmes, like lots of other sort of programmes in that vein, or making completely new and original work for TV, like The Vote or Gay Wedding or Western Flag.
And then what about your commissions that you're most proud of?
Well, so in the last year, I suppose the things I'm proudest of are, I mean, generally, the collective works of Swan Films and Grace and Perry. And this year we had Divided Britain just a few weeks ago. Grace on the election, I thought that was a really interesting new direction for him. And at the other end of the spectrum, we commissioned a brand new artwork for television, a year-long CGI art piece that sort of broke into the schedule on Earth Day, which is a sort of angry protest piece about climate change. Hopefully I'll get a chance to show you later, called Western Flag. I'm very proud of Random Acts. I think it's an amazing sort of initiative, £6 million, 3-year initiative with the Arts Council, trying to find and develop new talent across the country and do really properly experimental work on TV. But as far as forthcoming work goes, we've announced a whole load of new commissions today. So we've got a new strand that's called Artists in Residence, which is trying to extend the kind of work we've done with Grace really into new territory. And it's taking artists and inviting them to embed and spend time in the kind of locations that you'd otherwise make a peak time documentary about. So we've got Tyshan Chirenberg in West Bromwich Albion Football Club. We've got Rachel McLean in a location we can't reveal yet. We've got Bryony Kimmings in a sexual health clinic. We've also got Akram Khan as well. We're sharing him. But for us, he's not artist on arts. He's artist on robots. He's going to do we've got a big AI season coming in the autumn. And Akram's going to make a film in which he tours the world's sort of craziest robots, which sort of makes sense because he's a sort of expert on movement. And we're announcing that Zoe Ashton's the new presenter of Random Acts TV show, so hopefully that'll bring a broader audience to that. And we've got a film that doesn't obey any of those commissioning rules we just liked, about a guy called Willard Wigan, who's a micro-sculptor who makes the world's smallest artworks. So I think we've got quite a range now.
Yeah, as a Baggies fan, I'm particularly excited about that one. Wonderful. And then Mark, finally, 5 words for the BBC.
I knew you were going to ask me this, and I remember wrote 5 words down on Friday. I can't remember what they were now, but anyway.
I have them on my paper if it's helpful.
The world's, I don't know, the world's
greatest arts and culture.
Okay, that's fine. Greatest arts and culture. That's fine. I think the difference in the strategy between arts and the BBC and what Phil and John and Linda have mentioned is that I think we have to do more. We have to do a greater range of arts programming. So I think that our strategy will always look slightly more diffuse because I think we are expected to do a certain amount of coverage. We are expected to make arts documentaries in the classic mould. We're expected to make landmark documentary series, and we want to continue to do that. So the the strategic challenge is to do new, innovative, and exciting things at the same time as the things that people want from us. So we are working with artists more directly. We're working with arts institutions more directly, both through commissioning funds like Culture UK and Performance Live, which have recently been announced. But also, we're working more directly with artists, and so we've got a number of films that we're making with artists where they get to make art and the film they sort of want to make, but it's more in collaboration with directors. And so I think those two things are the sort of shift area. But in terms of things I'm proud of in the last year, I think the way we've established Saturday night on BBC Two as a genuine, it's a difficult arts destination because many people want to watch the entertainment shows on the other side, but nonetheless, it's a place where we can get into the primetime schedule and make films with conviction that I think really do cut through. And so the films that stand out for me in the last year was the Paula Rego film that was on in the spring, which Nick Willing, her son, made, which was a very powerful and intimate film about her. Francis Bacon film, which Richard Curzon-Smith made. Lovely film about Sue Townsend. Nice film about Alan Bennett. Nice film about Roald Dahl. So those sort of films which are indeed about artists and tend to, sort of tell the biography and tell the story of their creativity through that. Coming up, we've got I'm very excited about the prospect of a film about Basquiat to time with the Barbican show in the autumn, but we've got some people who've never spoken before about him, and I think that'll be a revealing and extraordinary. It's an extraordinary story and an extraordinary life story, and an extraordinary what's happened to him since his death has also been amazing. So I think you can make amazing films about artists that just are documentaries about the life. A couple of other things coming up. I was also very proud of a performance piece that my colleague Emma Cusack looked after. It was just a stage capture of Betroffenheit, Crystal Pite's extraordinary dance piece that was at Sadler's Wells that we just did a fairly straight stage capture of, but we hadn't done anything like that for a while. And whilst it was a select audience, I'm very pleased we did it.
Brilliant, thank you. And what I'll do now is we're going to have just a bit of an overview with some slightly more specific questions for each channel that will give context to then us talking through themes of lots of fun things like Brexit and the current climate of chaos, essentially. So, Linda, we'll come back to you.
Yeah.
For those in the audience that might not be familiar with ABC programming, could you give us a brief overview of what you do? I'm particularly fascinated that you're unique on the panel, that the only thing the ABC's charter has to deliver is arts programming. What does that mean for you?
Well, I think actually what it means for us is that we can take a lot more risks, and certainly that's something that we're interested in doing. And I say this having been in the job for 6 months, having just recently Brexited myself. So, but I guess the other thing it means is that we are kind of quite hamstrung in terms of what we can commission. You know, we need to have either a key creative on the team who's Australian, or some kind of, editorial content that is Australian. But I think, taking risks is something that we're all about, and we actively look to hold money back to do at least a couple of things each year that scare us a bit, that aren't necessarily going to be, great ratings winners. But I think being in the charter means that we can do that quite successfully, we hope.
Yeah, that's really useful, and we'll come back to kind of ratings and success measures for all of the channels a little bit later. It's probably something that perhaps Mark and all the public service broadcasters at the table might recognise, is that you have quite a number of reports of budget cuts at the ABC in the last year. How do you think this will affect your arts output, and does it make taking those risks more and more difficult?
Well, actually, interestingly, we've just found out that we're going to get some more money, which is quite nice. So, the ABC, there's been a new announcement recently that they're going to put arts and science front and centre of schedules. So that's something that's really good news for us. I think that we're constantly in a situation where we're facing budget cuts all the time. It's not something new. I think we just have to find new ways to handle it, always.
And is that arts and science as subject areas front and centre siloed, or are you thinking about ways of tackling those things together?
Siloed, but we're always looking at doing things together. But it's definitely, they're definitely two areas that management has looked at and said, you know, these are things that we want to put more money into, more emphasis on. But, you know, we have a tiny budget in arts because of the way it works in Australia. You know, we have something like $3 million to spend for the year, and we have to produce 57 hours with $3 million, but 2/3 of our budget is leveraged from external funding bodies. So it's a challenge for us because every project we do is like a patchwork quilt, and it means that nothing happens quickly. Everything creaks into life really slowly. That's something that I'm getting to grips with. But yeah, it's a challenge. But we actually produce some pretty amazing content for the tiny bit of money that we have, I think.
Yeah, certainly. Then Phil, recently reported that Sky's shift was all towards entertainment, not factual. So are you still open for business?
Yes, so that's a slight misunderstanding. So this, on Sky One, it's true to say we're moving out of traditional factual, so obdocs, an observational documentary series. They're no longer happening on Sky One, though we are very much in the factual entertainment game. And for Sky Arts, it's kind of, that's what we do. It's pretty, we have one scripted segment called Urban Myths, which is true stories from arts and cultural history. So we did Bob Dylan turning up to Dave Stewart's house in Crouch End and getting the wrong Dave, things like that. But the rest of our content is factual, and our budget for that has increased this year as well. So if anything, we're doing more.
Okay. And then what does, for you, it was a great year in terms of ratings for you on Sky Arts. What does it look like in a broader way on Sky? Is it, if it rolls out into the broader Sky universe, is it about those competition formats?
So I feel I've got enough of those now. I mean, the thing for me, the focus for me this past year has been about partnerships with arts and cultural institutions. So we did a show with the British Library, Treasures of the British Library, where we go into their vaults and finding all the delights they have in there. Did a great show with Tate Britain's Great British Walks, walking through the landscapes of the countryside of landscapes. Great partnership with the Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, people like that, the English National Opera, English National Ballet. So that's the thing I'm kind of really into at the moment. How can we make those partnerships work with kind of original TV formats? Great.
And then John, I'm really interested, given the slightly woeful makeup of this panel in terms of diversity. No offence, guys, but it's all right. You know.
It's a fair point.
The really vocal declaration from Channel 4 in terms of the 360 Diversity Charter. Can you tell us a bit more about how you're going to continue to focus on that, and what does it mean for you in arts commissioning?
Yeah, I mean, it's been part of our DNA from the start of the channel, and it's something I've been mindful of throughout. You think my first commission was Our Gay Wedding the Musical, you think of Grace and the people at Grace and Meet. Obviously, the conversation around diversity that began a few years back made us all mindful that we need to do much more about it, and we have been. And so I think if you look at the slate we've announced today, there's 5 hours, 3 of them are by BME men, 2 by women, or 2 focus on women. Random Acts is coming back, presented by Zoe Ashton. Over half of the films in that strand are made by, directed by women. 40% of them have a BME star or are directed by a BME filmmaker. So I sort of think you can see it coming through on screen, and I think off screen they've got a whole series of sort of programs to develop talent at all levels. But I mean, it's not, no one should be complacent about that. It's an ongoing challenge. And I suppose my hope is that when you look at that slate, you'll see the strongest possible argument for diversity, which is that it is not a sort of box-ticking exercise, it's an exercise in getting properly different perspectives. And that's what it says in our remit, is alternative perspectives in the world and new voices. So I think if you range as widely as you can for those, you get a wider range of angles, obviously.
Great. And then, other than Random Acts, Grayson, and some of your collaboration projects, what other art stuff is happening on Channel 4? Where do you see, are you trying to seep through the channel, or is it very much in your your segments?
Well, I mean, we've always done more than Grace and a Random Acts. I mean, you can see Gay Wedding, Vote, Rebuilding World Trade Center, all the work with James Rhodes. You know, you could sort of keep listening through Western Flag. And you can see in the slate we've announced today, there's the chance to sort of go further than that. The Artist in Residence strand will hopefully continue and take off. The Akram film and the Willard Wigan film, the kind of one-offs that we do every year. I suppose it's a bit of a question about how you categorise it. I mean, actually, the highest rating show on Channel 4 since 2012 was a co-commission between arts and drama, which was We're Going on a Bear Hunt. So, like, is that an arts programme? Sort of, we did it, Beth and I did it together, so yes, in that sense. I mean, Lucas did it, obviously, but Beth and I commissioned it together. But, and then all the sort of features and sort of architecture stuff, that sits with, you know, the kind of more participatory kind of craft end of things, that sits with features. Johnny Rothery commissions music. You know, if I could co-op drama like Sky Arts, then I'd have hundreds of hours. So, I mean, I suppose that there's a bit of a kind of semantic argument there. But my particular bit of the brief is I am charged with getting the most contemporary, innovative, experimental content, arts stuff, to as broad an audience as possible. Storytelling. Brilliant. To as broad an audience as possible.
Is he talking about content?
Yeah,
You've
I know.
said the C word about 5 times.
I'm so sorry. It's refined. No, I'm charged with getting that particular bit of the arts to as broad an audience as possible. And there, we choose to do a few really standout things rather than lots and lots of medium intensity things, so that when we do them, we can throw the full weight of marketing and, you know, press and everything behind them. And I think if you're a sort of ad-funded channel that's got a remit to innovate, that's the only sensible strategy. Yeah. I mean, without getting too economically determinist about it, you can sort of see everyone's doing what their funding models allow. And if you're a subscription channel that's a specialist channel, then you can do one thing. If you receive huge amounts of public money and you've got to be all things to all people, you do another thing. If you're a sort of ad-funded alternative, channel, you do, sort of, it just, you can sort of, everyone's moving within the constraints they've got, and that's what we're doing.
Great. Mark, John just mentioned you probably have the broadest remit of anyone on the panel.
I think we probably make a lot of original content across quite a broad range, yeah. So
how does it work? Do you invite pitches in from filmmakers, a lot of whom will probably be in this audience, for specific strands or specific channels,
sometimes,
or do you take the idea and move them around?
Okay, both. I think we develop a lot of ideas. We spend a lot of time in conversation with people, who've got the germ of something, and then we'll develop it from there. A lot of people come in with ideas that they think are definitely BBC Two, and they're probably not, and might be BBC Four, so we'll shift them around. We do have the benefit of having 3 channels, broadcast channels, that have a very different, different demographic, different approach. So we did very consciously make mainstream programs on BBC One to hit a broad audience, and you can get an audience of 4 million plus to a program that has lots of arts content in it, be it sort of Fake or Fortune or the Big Painting Challenge, those kind of programs that play on a Sunday night that get really very impressive audiences. And I think they are not they're not what we would normally describe as the core dedicated arts audience. They're not people who would necessarily see themselves as people who would watch arts programs, but very comfortably watch something that has an awful lot of art history or a sort of participation type shape within it that really works for them. So they are consciously pitched to a broader audience. On BBC Two, the challenge is to try and find the happy medium between the sort of they need to be reputational, but there are people who, there are subjects, there are names that bring in a broader audience, there are approaches that bring in a broader audience, and we're constantly looking for those. That's not to say that, I knew that the Alan Bennett film was going to do better than the Paul Orrego film, but I think we should be doing both, and the channel are very happy with that approach. And so that's one of the reasons why we do so many singles on Saturday nights on BBC Two. It enables us to cover that range, and I think it's important for us to do so. I think the shift is, we're doing a certain amount of shifting on BBC Four to make some of those commissions. We don't want to, there's clearly an audience for the travelogue show, and we will continue to do some of those. But we're looking for more, a bit more experimentation, a bit more authorship, a bit more sort of make some more original one-off, braver programs. So we're looking in. Looking to sort of shift the dial a bit towards authorship. on 4, more authorship on 4. It's not like we didn't do experimental on 4, but we're probably going to be doing a bit more of it.
Okay. Well, you've answered my next question about that balance between singles, strands and formats. I'll move on and say, what can you tell us a bit more about the newly announced Artists First Commissioning Fund? How can artists and first-time filmmakers access some of that £4 million?
Yeah, there's there are the two approaches that we have. Are we dipped our toe in the water with the space a couple of years back, and since then we've launched 2 things: Performance Live and the Artists First project. Both of them are trying to create a different relationship with the artist in terms of how we make and deliver content. So institutions, theatres, galleries, are becoming more and more sort of digitally enabled, and we are encouraging them to team up with filmmakers, the likes of you, to deliver us content through slightly non-traditional, not necessarily straight through a production company, might be through a production company, they may well team up with a producer or a production company, but the idea is that they have a lot more creative input into the process. Okay. So it's not to write either companies out of the picture or directors out of the picture, but to change the relationship between the artist and the finished product. Great.
We're going to hit into the debate and discussion point, and I wonder, I can just about see, but if we could just shift the balance of the audience lights a tiny bit so that I can see if throughout this session, if there's a question that strikes you, I've got a set of questions, but I'd love you guys to throw your hands up, and we'll have people roving down each of the staircases with mics. And I hope I can see you. If I don't respond, start waving at me. So let's start with the terrifying 3 words of Brexit, Trump, politics in my themes. I know, right? I've been watching cat videos all week. Cheerful. Just to reconnect with something lovely. But
that's worse than the C word, isn't it?
It is much worse than the C word. So last year, Grayson Perry was quoted that the pro-Brexit vote and the Trump election win were a big fuck you to the cosy Islington consensus and their nice parties with free booze, which I presume some of you have been to already at this festival. And he said that they're fed up of being told how to think and feel by us lot in our lovely Islington houses doing our media thing. Was Grayson also talking about arts TV commissioners? John, you commission him.
Yeah, definitely.
Does the above quote ring true to you? Does the panel think that Grayson has a point?
Of course, yes, he was. Yes, of course, it's true. I'm only pretending to roll my eyes at that subject matter. It's obviously the most important thing going on at the moment in this country. And it's incredibly important that we address it. Anyone who doesn't get, after what's happened, how divided and angry this country is needs their head examined. And Grayson is talking about us, but he's talking about himself, as he often does, in that way, sort of both being inside and outside the subject. He's talking about journalists, newspaper editors, Westminster politicians, the whole sort of lot of us, basically. And I spent Thursday night at a Grayson-hosted drinks party behind Tony Hall in the, buffet queue with a sort of scene that would have made the Daily Mail froth at the mouth. So, there is a definite sort of bubble issue there, right? But also, it's worth saying that all commissioning involves thinking yourself out and beyond the tastes and prejudices that you yourself might hold. If we didn't, we'll be out of a job. There's a very, very quick metric by which we get measured and told whether we're connecting with people. And if we aren't, there's no sort of hesitation about giving us the elbow. So I think it's more about who we're talking to, what range of conversations we're happening, where we're letting ideas come in from. And I think also it's a bit about what you see on screen. And on screen, Grayson's done a pretty good job of getting out of the Islington bubble and talking to people beyond the sort of traditional sort of Tate Modern crowd. And I think you'll see that again with the Artists in Residence programmes, and you definitely see it with Akram. And so I think we are doing things to address it. But in a way, the other thing that he's relishing there is the sort of ferment of current politics, and that's what I think the arts should be addressing. And I think if it does, it'll find an audience.
In a way, there's never been a better time to be an artist. There's so much to rail against in a way.
Completely.
But I think he does have a point, and it's beholden on us to try and reach parts of the country that we maybe haven't hitherto reached. So one of the things we've done recently, we have this project we've been running for about 3 or 4 years now called Amplify, which is an artist first kind of project where we ask artists to pitch in for a fund. It's £1 million every year. So the latest iteration of that is a thing called Art 50 that we're doing in collaboration with the Barbican and the Sage up in Newcastle. And we don't really know what the TV outcome of it's going to be yet, but the idea is that it's obviously a punning title on Article 50. It was launched the day that Article 50 was triggered. So the idea is over the next 2 years, we get 50 artists from around the country to respond to the idea of what it means to be British. So when we finally do our Brexiting, whatever day that is, when we become independent, there's going to be a big event based on what the artists have come up with. And already we're getting incredibly diverse voices from all over the place, in the broadest sense of diversity as well. So, we're sort of judging the ideas over the next couple of days, the first batch of them. But I've been very encouraged and inspired by the kind of conversations that have been happening around who we are now in this current climate.
Linda, do you have an international perspective on that?
Well, we're actually...
Are we the second most stupid country in the world or the first most stupid country in the world?
I'm not answering that question. We've got a series in production, early production at the moment, called Everyone's a Critic, which is actually about ordinary Australians' attitudes to art and taking them into galleries and giving them the chance to kind of talk about the art that they're seeing and giving their perspective on what it says about us, taste, all of those things. We're sort of actively looking for ways to kind of broaden out into, more populist areas, I guess, as well as carrying on doing the sort of single, strands and, interview program, all of the traditional. We also, I think the other challenge is how we kind of attract younger audiences, and that's something that we actually have a dedicated arts channel on iView. We're the only department in the ABC that has a dedicated channel, and we commission short form content for that. And we had a series called The Glass Bedroom, which was all about Instagram artists. So it's sort of looking at ways that we can not just develop new talent for the channel, but bring a sort of broader, younger audience to our content as well.
Brilliant.
Can I just, sorry, before we leave that subject behind, and Mark's going to say something, if I can just jump in a second,
I was just going to say one thing quickly, which was that it's a really interesting challenge to try and reflect the wide range of views of the country through arts programs, because the arts tend to be, we all know sitting around here that the people who watch arts programs tend to be quite a self-selected group, and it's a relatively small number of people. So when you make, even Grayson, when he goes to Tyneside and makes a film about with cage fighters, the chances are that beyond the actual cage fighters who are watching the program, there are probably not many other cage fighters watching it. Most of the people with the arts audience. And so how one gets past that is a really, really interesting challenge. And I think it's one we're all trying to crack. And the only way you can do it is with faith in your heart and a belief that what you're doing is authentic and important and worth doing. And you do it just in good faith, because I think the only thing you can do is just try and get to the nub of things. It's really hard to do it. I think the minute it gets difficult, and I think one thing Grayson's done brilliantly is he manages to be playful without being facetious, and I think that's an amazing skill. And I think that's why we all take our hats off to him. But there are cries of rage from all sorts of sectors of the population. It's not just the great cry of Brexit. I think young people feel as though many young people love the arts, but they don't feel as though what they watch on the television necessarily rocks their boat. And so I think we have to address all sorts of people who feel as though they're not finding their interests reflected on the television. I think it's an enormous challenge, but an exciting one. Sorry, that's more than one point.
Just to make a sort of broader point on this, right? There's a sort of snobbery inherent in the categorisation of some programmes as arts programmes and others as not, right? I mean, which this panel the existence of this panel participates in, right? So obviously we are talking about the arts and television. There's no one here from Britain's Got Talent, there's no one here from Strictly, there's no one here from X Factor, there's no one here from Grand Design. I mean, there's a whole range of popular culture that is basically what most people like that is not being talked about here, right? So if you look at the channels, they actually get on with it. They just do everything. They don't worry too much about all of that. And then they tend to task one person in a commissioning team, in our case of 50, with, you know, sort of going after that small bit that you believe to be good but not or not yet popular, and trying to broaden the audience for that. And I think that's a totally worthwhile project. And I think that it's a disaster if you then think, oh, we can't promote that bit because that's just our metropolitan elite taste.
Yeah.
Because the other stuff's very well represented. And like speaking personally, I discovered art through television, and it, you know, like through you know, American Visions, The Late Show, weird late night Czech animation on BBC Two, and my you know, in my sort of house that wasn't particularly into it. And it totally changed my life. I mean, that's why I live where I live. It's why I do the job I do. I'm, you know, live with my partner's an art dealer. I've got a little baby that I carry on exhibitions on a Saturday. I mean, it's totally transformative when you bump into stuff. And television is the medium through which you can bump into stuff. So I just think we worry about that too much in a way. I sort of think you need to be alive. We're all hungry for the new thing, and that will hopefully make sure that all these new cries of rage get represented, because we want to outdo each other and get them on air first, basically. But I think broad popular taste is well covered, and the bit we've got to fight for is the stuff that we know to be good but isn't yet popular.
It's also worth mentioning, I think the creative sector is in rude health.
Yeah.
You know, generally speaking, it contributes about 90 billion to the overall economy, and the cultural sector alone, I think, is about 13 billion. So it's in rude health, and it's going up and up and up. So, and also the thing I always like to say at Sky, which I get into terrible trouble for, is that I always say that more people, and this is true, more people go and visit arts and cultural events than go to football matches. But nobody likes to believe that.
No, but not the same one, unfortunately. That's the problem, isn't it? Because if you could just find, if they were all going to one, we could just fight for the broadcast rights and rate our socks off. But unfortunately, they're sort of too diffuse.
And also, don't you
Maybe
think
it's
that
too much
the
different taste.
definition is blurring all the time, the definition of what art is. You know, you say art and people immediately jump to this conclusion that it's, you know, the visual arts or something elitist. It doesn't necessarily have to be. It can be as broad as...
I love that idea that all we need to do is change the definition, and actually if we just make that whole swathe of 8 o'clock things about, you know, fashion, that's art, you know, we could...
But we'd
be off the hook immediately. It'd be great.
Also, quite a lot of people seem to like drama. They just prefer sort of Korean line of duty to what's going on the court. I mean, it's not like the broad mainstream. I would say, where do you think is the taste that's not being represented?
I think you're entirely right, and I think that sense of that idea of bumping into things is really interesting to me, because that sense of capital A arts, high culture, that I from Birmingham am only sitting here because an arts company, in inverted commas, came into my school and did an intervention because the school was failing.
On you?
And on literally just on me. No, but I am, because of that, a community arts organisation that wasn't considered high culture. It wasn't ballet or theatre or a gallery. And that notion of taking people into galleries because that's where the good stuff is, that notion of barriers and gatekeepers, I think is a really interesting one to be breaking down with exactly these things, of breaking down, bumping into stuff, and the sort of new innovative partnerships that you're all talking about. And I'm interested in that kind of partnerships landscape a little bit, just to move forward, because although the creative industries are in rude health, we are seeing in the UK, and probably the same in Australia, galleries having their funding cut, local councils selling off works of art and getting told off by heads of various departments in London. How important to you guys are partnerships, and how important to you in terms of that, moving past those barriers of specific institutions or specific big names, and also beyond that sense of diversity into that true, as Riz Ahmed would talk about, the true sense of representation. How important are those partnerships for you, and what are you really excited about in that space? Mark?
I think the interesting thing is a bit like Phil, I think we all do partnerships with a lot of the big institutions. You know, I think the exciting thing, what they have is they have material, they have, you know, art in their galleries, they have performances on their stages that we want to capitalise on and develop and bring to a wider audience. But they also have skills that need developing, and I think often, and they are struggling. A lot of particularly the publicly funded institutions, the smaller ones, are really struggling with funding. And so I think that part of what our partnership can do is help enable them to deliver projects digitally that they might otherwise just only be able to play on a stage. And I think that's a very exciting area. I don't quite know what will come of it. And I think quite a lot of performance, for instance, when you film it, it's not the same when you've filmed it as when you've seen it live. But at the same time, it's the way lots of people are consuming and will consume things in the future. And we have to have faith with it, I think.
And that's one of the things we did with our Amplified project, was all about hooking up artists and arts institutions with producers to develop digital skills. So some of the, not content, what's the word, programs made it onto television, thank you. And a lot of the work happened off screen, actually. So we spend a lot of time developing projects that don't necessarily make it to air, that are partnerships with smaller institutions around the country, as well as some of the bigger ones. But the key thing always about partnerships, I guess for us in particular, is we can help elevate them and they can help elevate us, because I'm part of my job is to get more people to understand what Sky Arts is, not be put off either by the word Sky or the word arts, and to come to us and go on that voyage of discovery with us as well. So if we can help you come together in the social networking sphere and all that sort of thing digitally, it really helps both of us. It's mutually beneficial.
And also, I think partnerships for us, it's not just about alliances with blue chip institutions, it's about alliances with other broadcasters and other genres, and blurring boundaries a bit and looking at ways that we can work with other commissioners and other broadcasts. I mean, if we are living in a truly global world now, which is what we're told we're doing, then I think we have to look at ways of creating more partnerships in that way as well.
We have one really, really important partnership which helps us broaden opportunity, which is sort of the partnership with the Arts Council or Arts Council England on Random Acts, which has enabled us, under the editorship of Pegah Farron and then Catherine Bray, to grow that from an experimental short film strand into a massive talent network and a way of reaching this Brexit issue you're talking about, the way of reaching beyond the London bubble. We now have 5 network centres across the country in partnership with arts organisations and production companies that deliver 120 short films to us every year for 3 years, finding and developing new filmmaking talents. That is crucial for us. Other partnerships, we do sort of slightly more ad hoc according to what the project is. So that the last room of Tate's Queer British Art Show is 6 random acts, right? That was a sort of partnership. When we did Western Flag, we had the money to make it work on online and on screen, and in a partnership with Somerset House and Thomas Dane Gallery and the Climate Change Collaboration, they managed to put up an enormous screen of it in the courtyard at Somerset House that made it a sort of real-world event too.
And we're going to see a little bit of that.
We can show a bit of that if you want, yeah, but there's a sort of, there's sort of, I think it's this thing, isn't it, of pooling resources. If there's a money crunch on, you come into it and you say, look, what can you do well, what can we do well, can we team up? And I like having the flexibility to be able to say, well, it'll work on that project, but not on that one, so let's just do this one.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions at this stage? We've got a question just here on the stairs, and another one straight after there.
I'm I guess, an artist filmmaker, and in the run-up to Brexit, I spent 2 months doing research and made a 21-episode web series of pros and cons of EU referendum. I'm an ex-banker, so it came from a place of understanding the FT. But it was really interesting when I was trying to get that put out. I got it out in Daily Motion. I ended up on London Live TV, and then ended up being interviewed on BBC Two in a programme. But in terms of me trying to make this piece of work and trying to get into you guys with the next step of commissioners, and I'm someone I do Edinburgh Fringe every year. There's lots of us artists who make stuff, which is very much to the point and is trying to be more diverse. But trying to get into you guys, I've found quite difficult. So it'd be really useful to have some, I know there's specific programmes, but those programmes change and turn over. So any advice on, I've got my next piece of work coming up. And I will always make work. Artists, we will make work. Filmmakers, we'll tell our stories. But then it's about getting into you guys to take it to the next level, be it training, funding, perception.
Right, just to answer that from my end, as your experience proves, we're not the only game in town anymore, right? So I would say that's a story of success, that if you're getting your films out on those platforms that particularly work for them, I narrow my focus to the things that only Channel 4 can do and only television can do, and I think we might struggle to get a broad audience to watch those, but I think that's a sort of I think the landscape's completely different, and it's not like getting on television is good and getting on sort of web servers or websites is bad. It's just sort of horses for courses. So I would be, you know, my email address is on the website. If anyone wants to send me an idea, I'll look at it. So I don't think there's a problem getting to us, or hopefully there's not a problem getting to us. There might be a problem getting on air, but that's because we need to sort of work out what only we can do in a very, very broad landscape.
And just because we're quite tight on time, I'm going to move on, but that is a good point. I come from a digital channel that's all about arts and culture as well, so that thinking about you're talking in really different ways to different people, which is fantastic. And just here we had one.
Thank you. I suppose it's very similar about access. Picking up the point that you made around capital A for arts, to the panel really, I just wonder how, if we're not considered to be part of the high arts section, other ways of potentially getting through to you. So, for example, if you have a character, a person who has majorly high numbers of hits, for example, on YouTube, is that something that you might then consider if it's not a Roald Dahl story or a Alan Bennett story, for example?
We have, I mean, you know, we had a bit of a platform developed on BBC Three before it went online, where we made a number of films for them and the iPlayer. We used Grace Victory and a couple of people who've got big social media profiles to make programs for us. I think we might still use them, but I think we need to make sure that if they're going to be on BBC Two, there's a reason for them to be there. We need to make sure that popularity online will transfer to the TV, and I don't think it always will. And also there is I think primarily I need to feel as though the knowledge and the understanding they bring is something that specifically works for the subject. I wouldn't just grab someone very, very popular, bolt them onto a subject and let them see what they've got to say. I think we'd need to really look quite closely at their proposition. I
mean, the truth is, just pick up on John's point as well, you kind of got to look at the platform you're aiming at and see what they do. You know, what we all do, as John also said, we also do things that are similar, but are very different tonally from each other. And it sounds like, so for example, we had the Amplified project, which has now become Art 50. So that's our big thing about new voices at the moment. So that's if you're sort of aiming at anything for Sky Arts, that's the place to aim at for that sort of
And we're
idea.
going to talk a little bit more about the themes between niche and broad appeal and thinking about how you take audiences on those journeys. But we've got one question just up here.
Hi, is this on? Yeah? Okay. This is from Mark, actually. So, Mark, you mentioned in your intro that you have a certain obligation to make more traditional arts programming, and you'll continue to do this. But now, since the launch of BBC Studios in April, in-house producers and directors have further obligation to compete with companies who maybe feel they can afford to take certain creative risks. So I was wondering what your vision of the future for the BBC Arts is, i.e., will you be looking to change your styles and formats to derive more from indies, or do you have a conviction to maintain a traditional BBC brand and identity in order to compete?
I think already many of the, I think it's actually a disservice for, I probably shouldn't have used the word traditional, because it's a disservice to the classic documentary to call it traditional in a way. It feels like it's a loaded description. I still want to make films that add to our understanding of art and artists, culture, to the point at which you feel as though people might be looking at them in 10 years' time and thinking, I'm really glad someone made that film. So when we made the Ted Hughes film, there were people talking there, giving their testimony, that won't be around for much longer, and that's probably the one time they'll get to speak on camera, and I think it's important that the BBC has that in its archive. So that film was made by an independent producer. It had many of the values that, classic BBC documentaries have. I think already the market is much more open. Studios, the arrival of studios, the departure of the BBC in-house arts department will change things. John and I and Linda all worked in BBC Arts at different points. And, I think it was an amazing thing.
They still exist, of course. They come and pitch to me now.
Yeah, BBC Studios exists. It has a different name. It still exists, but it has a different name. And it rightly is now out in the market. As Phil says, it can pitch to Phil, it can pitch to Channel 4, and it will be different because I no longer have the same relationship with that department as was then. They are now effectively on a more level playing field with other companies. So yes, it has changed things and it will be more open, but I hope that we'll still get the same content going forward.
And I'd like to...
Sorry, I used that word. Oh my God.
I'm going to bring a buzzer next time and I'm going to buzz you all.
Maybe somebody should just have a stick and hit it on the head when we say it.
And there's a part of that question that I want to pick up on that we're going to play a quick clip now, which is Western Flag, Spindletop, Texas, because a part of that question that resonated to me is thinking about how we challenge the form. That I would pose the question is not, given that we're in arts and culture programming, are we relying on forms when the world of arts and the way that stories are being communicated with immersive theatre, with exhibitions that are now much more installation and participatory, are we sticking with very, very traditional forms when actually the artistic expression and the artists that we're trying to cover are doing very, very different work? So should we be looking at different things? And this clip now will just give us a quick taste of something we're trying.
It's a silent clip, so I might talk over it.
Yeah,
Is that
that's
right?
fine.
It's not really,
Can we just run the first
clip?
clip?
Doesn't really make sense. Okay. So what this is my answer to your question, right, effectively. Yeah. We commissioned this, went out in April. It's an original artwork. It lasts 1 year. It's entirely CGI'd. It was commissioned by Channel 4 and broadcast on Channel 4 and online. What it is, that is a CGI replica of the landscape in Texas where the first great oil strike of the modern age basically gave birth to the world as we know it. And the artist, John Gerard, has gone there, taken about 10,000 photographs, put them into this sort of bit of software that builds a computer game world, replicated the landscape, created a flagpole in the middle of it, created a flag made of black smoke. And it's a sort of protest piece, effectively, about climate change. Now, that exists in cyberspace. It's still going in cyberspace. He's factored in exactly when the sun rises and sun sets and all the rest of it. So basically, it tracks exactly what's going on in Spindletop for a whole year. It played on this giant screen in Somerset House. It also broke into the Channel 4 schedule across 24 hours on Earth Day. It broke into an episode of George Clarke's Old House, New Home, to much to the consternation of various viewers on Twitter who thought that there'd been some sort of hack or attack. It played before the island. It sort of broke in. It sort of played in the ad breaks in the Lego Batman, not Lego Batman, whatever the Lego movie was we were playing that day. And I think, obviously it's incumbent upon us to keep thinking about, to keep responding to the cutting edge of what's going on in the art world, and visual arts response to the games industry and the world of digital possibilities is one of the most interesting things I think that's happening in the world of visual art at the moment. So that comes from going to see an exhibition of John's and just having a sort of proper hairs in the back of the neck moment and getting really excited about it. But it's also incumbent on us to sort of mess around with the form. So why shouldn't an arts commission be public broadcast and an intervention, 48 20-second interventions on the channel and playing continuously online or for a year. And that's a piece of work that's going to go on to play at the Dallas Museum of Art, at Los Angeles County Museum of Art. It's a worldwide commission, and it made me completely rethink what our arts commissioning could be.
I think it's tremendously exciting, when you can create a piece for TV that has a life outside, isn't it? And it will have a legacy afterwards. We've tried to do a few of those sorts of things, with our... we created a piece of musical theatre using algorithms to inform.
Oh, it was great.
It's quite an interesting piece, and hopefully that'll be revived one day and have a life outside that. We created a symphony for animals to enjoy, and these things are great to do, aren't they? Because they can sort of inspire other ideas for sort of programs off the back of it. But I think that's absolutely fantastic,
great.
And we'll live on.
I think that's the whole interesting thing about it, is that it's. There's not a lot of, there's a lot of backstory there. There's not a lot of story in the art. It is just itself, and that's what's so exciting about it. But almost, so many of the programs, films we make end up having different, manifestations. A lot of the films we make end up having cinematic releases before they come to air. The boundaries between the cinema, the gallery, the TV space, the online space, are getting more and more sort of flexible, and I think that's a good thing. And I think when you make a film and it somebody decides to put it on in cinema, you feel proud. When you see a piece of art, you contribute to a piece of art that you've had a hand in the creation of, that ends up having a life online and elsewhere and in Dallas. How great that is. Yeah, terrific.
So I'm going to canter us forward because I think we're
Canter
answering
through content.
these questions. Absolutely not. And I won't run through a wheat field either.
Thanks.
So we're challenging the form and the function. I think that's really interesting, and everyone's trying to do that. I'm really interested to pick up challenging the audience, that sense of actually what arts and culture can do is provoke feelings and thoughts of us to think about our own experience in the world. And so I'd like us to play the clip from Linda of Guilty and to talk a little bit about how you do that and about how that might be.
And this is a trailer, because they're about to go into the edit.
Great. So could you tell people about the project just very briefly?
This is one of the Hive films that I was talking about before that's being made by an artist. And I think it's a really great example of how you can tackle a social issue subject. So it's part social issue, part campaign, but it's very definitely an arts film.
Very challenging subject matter.
Yes.
But clearly very important. How do you work as a channel to bring audience to that?
Well, I should also say that it's not straight documentary. They are shooting it as a sort of hybrid drama doc. So it's quite interesting, the approach.
So that's one of the audience approaches, would you say, in terms of hybridizing it, making it feel a bit more narrative, a bit more drama-y might bring more audience?
Yes, possibly. I think, I don't know that we necessarily think about it that way. I think, because this is an opportunity for an artist to create whatever film they want to create, it's about us giving them the opportunity to take that subject and put it onto whatever canvas they want to put it onto. And I think it comes back to the point I was making earlier about just, wanting to take more risks with our programs and not necessarily just going down the straight documentary road and blurring the boundaries a bit more and, actively looking to kind of commission a, cross-genre with other genres. And, I think I'm incredibly excited about that. It makes me cry every time I see that trailer, but I'm incredibly excited about what they're going to produce.
Yeah, it looks extraordinary. We're going to move straight on to another couple of clips here, because all of these link, and then I will make sure I pick up on questions again for us to close out the session. But there's two really lovely clips. We're going to see a clip from Why Do We Dance from Sky, and we're also going to see a very sneak peek of Akram Khan on robots, which when I was watching it through, I was trying to kind of see it. It's amazing. But that sense of, this centres around my question about, to develop audiences, you sometimes have to take risks on form and talent, and that sense of us looking at these and seeing two different approaches. Ostensibly, you could argue they both have the subject of dance as their kind of core films, but like you've already said, actually it's much more about AI and robots. So let's have a look at.
Can I just
clip.
add a little caveat, because this is hot off the press, as it were, raw. It's bolted together stuff.
You're seeing literally out of the edit room, raw storytelling.
Yeah.
Now, are they going to go back to back? Because I should do a caveat too, which is that
Hannah.
It's a Swan Films production. It's being directed by Hannah Berryman. She's very kindly given us some of the rushes from her. She's mid-shoot, basically.
Yeah.
So she's
So
sort of
not even
she's
cut,
trusting us
just
with these.
assembled.
They are a bit. They're cut a little bit.
So similarly, we're mid-shoot. Sorry, double caveat.
We're more mid-shoot.
Everyone, don't judge what's going on.
No, but
You're getting
and I want to
exclusive
say-
access.
It's like viewings, isn't it? Before you watch it.
Yes, exactly. Disclaimers.
They're both wonderful. You'll be fine. If we could run those now. So, both really, really interesting programs around different things. We're going to do a tiny bit more discussion. We'll end on Mark's Sheffield clip, and then we'll have questions. But there's the last question I want to ask before we run that and then open to the audience for the last sort of 5 minutes is, an example I kind of regularly cite from my own experience working in film and seeing the trajectory of someone like Steve McQueen at Film 4 is that sense of developing audiences and taking risks again is you would never have got 12 Years a Slave if you hadn't first made Hunger and then Shame. You can see a real wonderful kind of narrative journey, a filmmaking journey. But, if you start with Hunger, incredibly challenging on all fronts. Do you think, as commissioners working in the TV landscape, in that linear landscape, that you're trapped by ratings as your pure success factor, or are ratings your only success factor? What does success look like to your respective platforms?
So I can certainly speak about ratings. They're not... well, of course ratings matter, but so if I've got enough in the schedule that allows that to happen, that gets a big audience, I can take a lot more risks across the rest of the schedule.
So if you have a national treasure, you can take more risks on new voices?
Absolutely.
But can you do that because your subscription, you have a kind of captive audience?
Well, what we do, we have, and again, something can be successful if it gets an audience of 10,000, if those 10,000 people really passionately love it. So, for example, we did Wagner, this is maybe not the best example, we did Wagner's Ring Cycle live from Bayreuth in Germany. Not a ratings winner, I have to say, but the approximately 7,500 people who stuck it the whole way through absolutely loved it passionately. And so we can do that. But we can also develop new voices.
But that
ways, and it doesn't have to rate.
Because that would presumably be the aficionado audience you're talking about, though. So there's no new converts or no new...
Yeah, you get some around the edges, but generally we're catering for that niche audience occasionally too.
Okay. Mark, just quickly.
I'd love the opportunity to make a major feature film with somebody like Steve McQueen, but to be honest, I think that BBC Films and other people would be wanting to get in there. I think we should be developing things with artists to see where their voice is heading. I'd be making, I might well be making a 90-minute film with someone, but it probably wouldn't be pure drama. We are making some dramatic pieces. Mark Gatiss has done a series of monologues for us, which is playing around the anniversary of the 67 Act, which is a number of writers and single performers, Russell Tovey, Ben Whishaw, and some really great actors doing 15-minute monologues that tell decade by decade the history of the gay experience of the last century. It's obviously partial. It's very much Mark Gatiss's sort of position. It's sort of from he's masterminded it. And to give people the space to make the thing they want to make is part of our job. I think we're here to enable the way, artists are there to help people see the world differently. I think it's part of the relation. So those are the success factor is the work itself, as well as then the impact on the world. I think that, exactly. I think it's the work itself, and I think what Phil said, which is that if a few people really like it, that can be as good as lots of people quite liking it. Well, that's what we would call in the digital world the engagement rate, rather than just the views. Yeah. People talk about yield, don't they? Well, we have to know what yield means. Yield on content. Yeah. I think everyone stop saying content. I think we'd all be lying if we said that ratings weren't omnipresent. But I think there's a specific example that sticks in my mind of something that the ABC did a few years ago called The Divorce, which was an episodic opera. So like a soap opera. Yeah. And, it didn't work for many reasons. But shit, I just bought it for Sky Art. Did you? Yeah, it's on next week. There's some lessons to be learned after this panel. I would suggest subtitles. No, I got a 90-minute version. It's not episodic. There'll be a lot of engagement. But it's great content. Exactly. You've got to. You are banned from panels. But you've got to give it a go. Yep. I mean, it was, and the fact that we did, and it, a lot of people loved it. Some people hated it, but. Great. It shouldn't stop you from trying things like that. It's fun. John, anything super quick to add before we play the last clip? And I want to add that I love the look of Phil's dance series. Yeah, me too. I really love dance. I just think the more of it on TV, the better. So that's great. And it is a really brilliant case study of two radically different approaches to the same medium. Right, on the ratings, obviously, like everyone else has said, basically, it's we're judged on probably quality, impact, ratings in that order. They're a necessary minimum.
We don't get any public money, so no ratings equals no money. So like, at some point you've got to rate. But I quite like the discipline that imposes, because I sort of think there's a world of niches, right? We're in a ever more atomised, sort of smaller bubbles sort of world. And to sort of know that as a broadcaster you've got to do the bit which is about being broad and creating a national public conversation, that's quite good. So I sort of think I quite like the discipline it imposes on what we're doing.
So the clue's in the title, broadcaster. Okay.
And I meant in a rating sense.
Yes.
Don't worry, it won't wait for us either.
So if we will just play, for reasons of balance and representation, we will play the Sheffield clip, the first of the two, and then get your questions ready. We'll hopefully fit in just one or two. And is that okay? One. I'm getting one, so it has to be the best. Great. So we can take one last question, but I'll say before that, you know what they look like. It's their responsibility to be harangued by you after this session. I've got one up here. Anybody else desperate? No? Okay, so we'll go up there.
Hi, thank you to all the panel. My question is kind of connected to the diversity in which you're aiming to seek within the field, and kind of representing unheard voices. I work with teenagers who've been excluded from mainstream education, 12 to 14-year-olds, and they're some of the greatest creative minds I've ever worked with, and they're only young teenagers. And obviously they're not really engaged in the mainstream kind of artistic output that, I guess, the channel's outreach in a way. So my question is really, how do we engage these kind of minds, first of all, for their artistic potential in terms of their output in the future, if they're not engaged with mainstream kind of media? And also, on the point of engagement, how do we engage, different strata of society who are extremely creatively, have a lot of potential and a lot to give, and how do we match that kind of disparity and diffuse the elitist notion of the arts, basically?
Great last question.
Before I answer that, can I just ask you, you're working with them, right? What do you think would engage them?
I think they're heavily engaged. I think they are extremely able. They produce amazing art, poetry of all kinds. It's just the channels, you know what I mean? How would they be seen? Because they might go down certain routes, but on a mainstream, how do we get their work out there? And I know there's a brilliant exhibition once a year in the South Bank Centre called it's Outsiders Art. It's the Coastal Trust, and they engage prisoners' art and it's arts by offenders, basically, and that is amazing, bringing that to the mainstream. It's amazing. It's every sort of November in the South Bank Centre. I really recommend everyone to see it. But I know they're heavily engaged, but it's matching. They're still very young, but in terms of all ages, how do we engage them at the forefront of mainstream media?
So just another question.
You're going to get lots of questions back.
But presumably there are channels that not necessarily mainstream television channels that they're engaged with themselves too, where the work can be socialised a little bit more. Where do they sort of find the content that they like?
It is from mainstream media. Obviously, they watch a lot of films. They do a lot of gaming, a lot of them, like PS4, a lot of these kids. But I guess it's more of a question to you guys.
I think there's a good provocation in that, in the sense of I always cite, with great reach comes great responsibility. It's a paraphrase of Spider-Man. And you all are in your... It's true. You are all in your own specific ecosystems, but actually for those ecosystems in a broader sense to keep going, that generation does have to be engaged in the work. And I think it's perhaps a really good thing, unless anyone has anything burning to say, for you all to take away with you.
I've just got one practical suggestion, which is that's exactly what the Random Acts Network Centres are there to capture. So if you've got there will be one near you, and that's our feeder stream for that kind of work. If by engagement you mean getting seen as opposed to watching, so that's.
And in fact, each of the commissioners have talked about one of those, whether it's, as clunky as New Talent Initiative, but Random Acts and the Artist 50, everybody's talked about versions of those. And I think by engaging with them, you can then influence kind of what they become as they progress as well. I think could be really interesting. I'd love you to join me in thanking a very interesting panel. I only got through half of the questions. And please do pounce on them afterwards. They'll hate me for saying that. And everyone exit through the gift shop.